You carry something in your consciousness that sets you apart, not through superiority, but through a different relationship with reality itself. Not everyone experiences the world as a field of symbolic meaning. Not everyone feels the weight of unspoken truths pressing against the surface of ordinary conversation. But you do. And this is not accident. This is not weakness. This is the mark of a psyche refusing to remain unconscious. Something within you has already begun the work of awakening, whether you named it as such or not. The restlessness you feel, the sense that surface explanations no longer satisfy, this is not confusion. This is the self calling the ego toward a more authentic existence. And while the conscious mind may resist this summons, interpreting it as isolation or difficulty, the unconscious knows better. According to my research into the individuation process, certain psychological markers emerge consistently in those undergoing authentic spiritual transformation. These are not beliefs adopted from external teachings. These are capacities that develop organically when the psyche begins its work of integration. They appear across cultures, across centuries, in anyone who has chosen, consciously or not, to face the depths rather than flee them. Through years of studying the unconscious, I observed that spiritual awakening is not what most imagine. It is not bliss. It is not escape from the human condition. It is the terrible and magnificent work of becoming conscious, of bringing light to shadow, of integrating what has been split, of standing in the tension between opposites without collapsing into comfortable one-sidedness. What the collective calls difficulty or sensitivity is often the psyche's attempt to break free from unconscious identification with the masses, the comfortable numbness that allows most to move through life without quotation. This becomes impossible for the awakening soul, not because you are special, but because something in you has already said yes to a different path, and once that yes is spoken in the depths, there is no returning to comfortable sleep. This is not punishment, this is initiation, and the traits you carry, the ones that have made you feel strange, isolated, too much or not enough, these are not flaws in your character. These are the instruments through which consciousness itself does its work. First, there emerges a relationship with solitude that transforms from burden into necessity. Where once aloneness felt like punishment or evidence of social failure, it becomes sanctuary. The awakened soul discovers that solitude is not isolation, but the only environment in which certain inner work can occur. The psyche operates through compensation, always seeking balance. When the outer world demands constant performance of persona, the mask we wear for collective acceptance, the inner world requires retreat. The unconscious needs silence to make itself heard. It speaks in whispers, in symbols, in dreams that dissolve under the harsh light of social noise. What emerges from this transformed relationship with solitude is not bitterness or misanthropy. It is discernment. You learn the difference between loneliness, which is the ego's fear of abandonment, and solitude, which is the self's requirement for integration. You begin to crave time alone, not because you hate others, but because you have discovered something precious in the quiet that cannot survive in crowds. The world will call this antisocial. The extroverted collective ideal demands constant connection, constant stimulation, constant proof of belonging. But depth psychology reveals that the most profound transformations occur in withdrawal. The hero must leave the village. The seeker must enter the desert. The initiate must face the darkness alone. Your need for solitude is not avoidance. It is the psyche protecting its most sacred work from the profane demands of collective unconsciousness. When you honor this need without guilt, you create space for the self to emerge. Second, the capacity to hold paradox without collapsing into binary thinking develops. The ordinary mind seeks comfort in certainty. It wants clear categories, good or bad, right or wrong, spiritual or material. But the awakened consciousness learns to stand in the tension between opposites, recognizing that truth often lives in paradox. This capacity does not come easily. The ego resists it violently because paradox threatens the ego's primary function, creating the illusion of a unified, consistent self. To hold paradox is to acknowledge that you contain multitudes, that contradictions coexist within the same psyche, that light and shadow are not enemies but partners in wholeness. What I came to understand through analytical work is that psychological maturity is measured not by the elimination of contradiction, but by the capacity to contain it. The spiritually awakened soul can hold both love and anger toward the same person, can see both beauty and horror in the same moment, can acknowledge both divine and animal nature without splitting them into separate realms. This is the beginning of what I called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to unite opposites into a third thing that transcends both. Not through compromise, which weakens both sides, but through creative synthesis that honors the truth in each. The person who can hold paradox has access to a dimension of reality invisible to those trapped in either-or thinking. You feel this capacity growing in you, do you not? The way simplistic answers no longer satisfy, the way you can see validity in opposing viewpoints without feeling compelled to choose one and annihilate the other. This is not confusion. This is the emergence of wisdom. Third, a refined sensitivity to psychological atmospheres and unspoken dynamics appears. The awakened soul develops what might be called psychic porosity, an openness to the subtle energies that most filter out through unconscious defense. You walk into a room and feel the tension no one acknowledges. You sense the gap between spoken words and emotional truth. You know when something is wrong even when everything appears fine. The collective unconscious is not abstract theory. It is a living field of shared psychological patterns, archetypal forces, emotional currents that move beneath surface awareness. Most remain unconscious of this dimension, protected by thick psychological walls. But as awakening occurs, these walls become permeable. You begin to sense what others cannot or will not feel. This sensitivity is exhausting. It makes crowded places overwhelming. It makes shallow conversation painful. It makes deception transparent. And because others do not experience reality this way, they often dismiss your perceptions as projection or oversensitivity. But what analytical work demonstrated again and again is that this sensitivity is perception, not invention. The unconscious communicates through channels the rational mind dismisses: body language, energy shifts, the specific quality of silence, micro-expressions that flash across faces. The awakened soul has learned to read these signs because the unconscious within recognizes the unconscious without. This does not mean you are always right about what you sense. Projection is real, and your own shadow can distort perception. But more often than you realize, your subtle knowing is accurate. The discomfort you feel around certain people is not paranoia. It is the psyche warning you of something your conscious mind has not yet understood. Learn to trust this knowing while remaining humble about interpretation. The energy you sense is real. Your understanding of what it means may require refinement. This balance, trusting intuition while maintaining critical awareness, this is the mark of integrated sensitivity. Fourth, the ability to find meaning in suffering rather than simply seeking its elimination. The modern world treats suffering as malfunction to be medicated away, but the awakened consciousness recognizes suffering as the primary vehicle of transformation, not all suffering of ours. There is pointless suffering born of unconsciousness and cruelty, but there is also sacred suffering, the kind that breaks open the hard shell of ego and forces consciousness to expand. Individuation requires descent. The hero's journey always includes the ordeal in the underworld. The alchemists knew this. They called it the nigredo, the blackening, the necessary dissolution before new form can emerge. You cannot become whole by pursuing only light. You must enter the darkness and bring consciousness there. I recall a woman who came to me consumed by grief after loss. For months, well-meaning others urged her to move on, to focus on positive memories, to return to normal life. But something in her resisted this, not from weakness or self-indulgence, but from an instinct that this grief carried something essential. Through our work, she discovered that her suffering was not just about what she had lost. It was about confronting everything she had avoided feeling her entire life. The loss had cracked open a vessel she had kept sealed, and once opened, all the unfelt emotions of decades poured forth. What emerged was not recovery in the conventional sense. She did not return to who she had been. She became someone new, more authentic, more present, less defended against life's full spectrum. The suffering had initiated her into deeper relationship with reality. This is what sacred suffering does. It destroys the false self so the true self can emerge. Your suffering is not punishment. It is not evidence that you failed at positivity or manifested incorrectly. It is the psyche's fierce insistence that you grow beyond the limitations of your current consciousness. When you stop running from it and instead ask what it demands of you, suffering becomes teacher. Fifth, an instinctive resistance to collective unconsciousness and group hypnosis. The awakened soul cannot fully participate in mass movements, even benevolent ones, because something within detects the loss of individual consciousness that groups demand. You feel it when everyone around you adopts the same opinion without examination, when emotional contagion sweeps through crowds, when the group identity asks you to surrender critical thinking for belonging. The collective unconscious contains both treasures and terrors. It holds the archetypal wisdom of humanity, the patterns that connect us across time and culture, but it also holds the shadow of the collective, the capacity for groupthink, scapegoating, projection of evil onto the other, mass hysteria. When individual consciousness dissolves into group consciousness, this shadow activates. My analytical work revealed that individuation is fundamentally at odds with group identification. Not because connection is wrong, but because true connection requires two individuals meeting consciously. When you dissolve your individuality to merge with the collective, you bring nothing unique to the encounter. You become an interchangeable unit in a mass. You have felt this tension, have you not? The subtle pressure to conform, to adopt the approved opinions, to signal your belonging through ideological performance. And something in you resists even when the group's stated values seem noble. This is not contrarianism. This is the self refusing to surrender consciousness for comfort. This resistance makes you politically homeless. The left suspects you. The right suspects you. Any group that demands total agreement becomes uncomfortable with your presence. Because you carry questions where they demand answers, you hold nuance where they require purity, you maintain individual discernment where they expect obedience to group consensus. This is lonely, but it is necessary. The world needs individuals who can think independently, who can resist mass movements toward unconsciousness, who can stand outside the collective trance and see clearly. This is not arrogance, this is responsibility. Sixth, the experience of synchronicity as a natural language of the psyche. The awakened soul begins to notice meaningful coincidences, moments when inner and outer reality mirror each other in ways that defy probability. You think of someone moments before they call. You encounter exactly the book or teacher you need at the precise moment you need them. Symbols from dreams appear in waking life. What became clear through decades of observation is that synchronicity is not supernatural. It is the natural operation of a unified reality in which psyche and matter are not separate but interpenetrating. The unconscious does not exist only inside your skull. It is a dimension of reality itself. And when you become conscious enough to perceive it, the boundaries between inner and outer become fluid. The rational mind dismisses synchronicity as coincidence or confirmation bias. And certainly, projection occurs. You can read meaning into randomness when unconscious wishes are strong enough. But authentic synchronicity has a different quality. It carries the numinous, that sense of encountering something sacred, something that speaks to your depths with uncanny precision. For the awakened consciousness, synchronicity becomes a feedback system. The unconscious communicates through these meaningful coincidences, guiding attention toward what needs to be seen, confirming when you are aligned with the self's intentions, warning when you have drifted into ego inflation or shadow possession. You learn to read these signs not superstitiously, but as a dialogue between consciousness and the greater intelligence of the psyche. This does not mean abandoning reason. It means expanding your framework to include dimensions of reality that materialism cannot explain. Synchronicity and causality are not opposites. They are complementary ways of understanding how things connect. The awakened soul can honor both. Seventh, the capacity to integrate darkness without being consumed by it. Perhaps this is the most critical trait of all. The spiritually awakened soul does not transcend shadow. It integrates shadow. It learns to acknowledge the darkness within without identifying with it, to face destructive impulses without acting on them, to contain what others project away. The shadow functions by remaining unconscious. Whatever you deny in yourself, your capacity for cruelty, your selfish desires, your rage, your envy, this does not disappear. It goes underground, where it operates autonomously, sabotaging your conscious intentions. The path of awakening requires bringing this shadow material into awareness, not to indulge it, but to integrate it. This is terrifying work. To look honestly at your own darkness is to face what you have spent your life avoiding. The parts of yourself you deem unacceptable, the impulses that contradict your self-image, the ways you have harmed others while telling yourself you were righteous. The unconscious, as I came to understand, refuses to be governed by will alone. You cannot simply decide to be good and thereby eliminate darkness. You must meet it consciously. What emerges from this confrontation is not moral perfection, it is wholeness. The integrated person does not claim to be without shadow. They claim to be aware of shadow. They know their capacity for evil, which paradoxically makes them less likely to enact it. Because when you own your darkness, you are not possessed by it. The world is full of people convinced of their own goodness who unconsciously project their shadow onto others and commit atrocities in the name of righteousness. The awakened soul is more humble, more dangerous in potential perhaps, but less dangerous in actuality because consciousness creates choice where unconsciousness creates compulsion. You have glimpsed your own shadow, have you not? In moments of rage, you thought yourself incapable of. In jealousy that contradicted your spiritual self-image. In desires you were taught to be ashamed of. And rather than fleeing these moments into denial or spiritual bypassing, something in you chose to look, to acknowledge, to integrate. This is courage. Not the courage of external heroism, but the courage of inner honesty. And this courage is what separates authentic awakening from spiritual fantasy. These 7 traits do not arrive complete. They develop gradually through the painful, exhilarating work of individuation. They are not rewards for spiritual achievement, but natural consequences of choosing consciousness over comfort. And they exact a price: isolation from the collective, constant inner tension, the weight of seeing what others do not see. But here is what emerges when these capacities mature. You become capable of genuine relationship because you bring consciousness rather than projection. You develop creativity that channels archetypal energy rather than ego ambition. You find meaning even in meaninglessness because you understand suffering as initiation. You stand on your own ground, connected to something deeper than collective opinion. The transformation is not from broken to fixed. It is from unconscious to conscious, from fragmented to whole, from possessed by the psyche to in relationship with the psyche. This is not ascension into some higher realm. This is descent into fuller humanity. The path of awakening is not for everyone, and this is not judgment. Most are called to other tasks, to live well within the collective, to build and maintain the structures of society, to find meaning through external achievement and relationship. These are valid paths, but they are not your path. You who carry these 7 traits have been claimed by something that will not let you rest in comfortable unconsciousness. The self has called, and once called, you cannot unhear it. You can delay, you can resist, you can exhaust yourself trying to be someone you are not, but eventually you will have to answer. This answer is not spoken in words, it is lived in daily choice, in the willingness to sit with discomfort rather than flee into distraction, in the courage to feel deeply in a world that numbs, in the commitment to truth even when lies are more convenient, in the integration of shadow even when light is more appealing, in the embrace of solitude even when connection is available, in the tolerance of paradox even when certainty is demanded. You are not broken. You are not too sensitive, too isolated, too strange. You are undergoing the most ancient and necessary work the human psyche can undertake. The transformation from unconscious collective member to conscious individual. This work has always been rare, it has always been difficult, and it has always been essential. The world needs those who have done this work, not to lead or to teach or to save others, but simply to embody a different possibility, to demonstrate that consciousness is possible, that wholeness can be achieved, that the darkness can be faced and integrated, that meaning can be found even in suffering. You carry something ancient forward into new form. The traits you possess are not individual quirks, but archetypal patterns repeating through you. Countless souls across countless centuries have walked this path before you. They are not gone. They live in the collective unconscious, and their wisdom is available to you in moments of deep listening. Trust what you know in your depths. Trust the solitude that nourishes you. Trust the paradoxes you hold. Trust the sensitivity that makes you permeable to truth. Trust the meaning you find in suffering. Trust your resistance to group consciousness. Trust the synchronicities that guide you. Trust your willingness to face darkness. The awakening has already begun. What remains is not to achieve it, but to allow it. To stop resisting the transformation your psyche demands. To surrender the false self with all its protections and performances. To stand naked before the depths and say, I am here. I am ready. Show me what I must become. This is not the end of difficulty. It is the beginning of conscious relationship with difficulty. Not the elimination of suffering, but the discovery of suffering's purpose. Not transcendence of the human condition, but full embodiment of it, shadow and light, divine and animal, conscious and unconscious, integrated into wholeness. You who recognize these patterns in yourself, you are not reading these words by accident. Something in you knew to listen, something in you is ready for what comes next. The journey unfolds, but only you can decide to take the next step.